Absolutely. It is with Bobby, who is in on the call. Hello, Bobby. I'm just setting up YouTube for going live, and I'll announce it.
Cool.
Of course, the Twitter for the podcast is set up. Just needs to be populated with all the things. So you could probably see if you can. I'm just going to put it in the chat. See if you can see us in live mode. Someone can double check that we're streaming properly and that we can hear everything. Then we'll do the introductions and all of those things. And yeah, so this will be good. I know, Bobby, I don't want to spoil any content for the podcast, but you're going to be doing some more regular updates, I guess. This little meetup thing for once a month. So
yeah, we're going to do a webinar once a month.
Just make sure that we don't forget to mention that. I have my note-taking scraps of paper here. What did you want to go over today? So definitely the new kind of a webinar that you're going to do once a month, right?
Yep, and here I'm dropping a link in the chat.
And then we're going to have latest improvements in the yep. So per month. Okay. Well, anything else you want to go over? I'll do the intro and all that.
Just the upgrade to ONode Essential is available, which gives everyone access to start collaboration sessions, and it removes the limitation on the number of event models which you can manage. So want to mention that as well.
Yeah, do not let me forget to ask about that. But then we also have the peanut gallery to ask random questions after our presentation. But hopefully this podcasting will be a better outlet for what we do in the meetup anyway, which is a lot of chat. And I want to move the Friday one, as you know, to be more the hands-on, where we have visual displays and all that kind of stuff. So this is the podcast channel, which means someone listening in their car should be able to, understand what we're talking about, not have to pull over and try to get in on the YouTube to see what we're doing. Right. So it's a podcast style, and put on your best radio voice, and
and radio face.
I've got radio, I got that taken care of on my side, so that's okay. Let's see here. I think we have enough people to participate after on questions and answers. Let's just tweet this out so people understand what we're doing. And yes, I have. Let's do it through the event modeling channel.
Are you going to release like show notes after the fact along with?
Yeah, if you want to, especially if you want to make sure that I got it all right, send me whatever you want from your perspective. I'll paste them in.
Great.
I tend to be very bad at show notes. I get so busy with my work that I end up not doing them. So I think with Justin and Steve and others, we're just going to have a better effort on all of the media stuff, because I think it's overwhelming me. There's a lot to do every week.
Sure.
On top of running the business. So let's just see here. Okay, we're live with Bobby. Creator of ONode software on the event-driven podcast. Coming up in soon to be, I think I called it event-driven underscore PD for podcast, or PD. What did I call it? I don't even remember what I called it. Whatever. I'll just leave it as a hashtag. Good enough. And here we have this. So hopefully this. Did anyone check if the YouTube thing is going well? Steve? Anybody? Bueller?
Again.
Let me mute myself here and I'll play it.
No, it's okay. Is it? I just wanted to double check because
I just don't want to have an echo. So
yeah, it's all good. This is the third episode, so we're allowed.
I haven't got the notification that it's gone live yet. That's interesting.
Oh, you haven't, eh?
No.
But it's the other channel though. It's the event-driven podcast channel. So I just tweeted it. You can check that tweet and you can subscribe to that channel now. So you'll get alerts whenever we go live with the podcast. And that'll be a good chance to kind of say, hey, I want to jump in and ask some questions, which will be cool. So hopefully you see that now.
You're live, yeah.
It's good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Sweet. Yeah, it's good enough. People that want to know, they'll be here. Maybe we can also do that. We're live on the event driven podcast.
Right, it seems to be working.
Yeah, sweet. Okay.
I've had a nice funny echo and it seems to be working.
That's okay. This episode covers note. Oh, yes, there it is. You do have a LinkedIn page, Bobby. Great. It's nice to be able to reference that.
Yes.
See, Bobby has someone hired to do all of the media stuff. He's smart. Be like Bobby.
It's a full-time thing, man. That's no joke.
It certainly is. I'm just happy to, tag along and learn because we're kind of doing it ourselves, which is, it's that little charming thing that says, hey, you too can do this. Look at these guys. Okay, amateurs put stuff together. You can do it too. Maybe we're going for the more authentic, cheap look. So here we go. Okay, this episode covers note with its creator, Bobby Calderwood. And from, what's your hometown?
Highland, Utah.
From Highland, Utah, in this corner. Gotta get the announcer voice. There we go. Post. Okay. So thank you, Bobby, for joining us on this impromptu episode. I don't think it's really impromptu. It was, one of the most sought after episodes to start this podcast with, because I think what you're doing is really the end goal that I see in quite a lot of what we're struggling with in the software industry, creating this bridge between tech and business. So discovering event modeling and its advantages together was kind of nice to have it done in a separate area, not really doing anything together until you created note, which we'll hear all about. So this is a very important episode in my eyes, that we're tracing your steps through getting to that next level where we have that seamless flow of automation coming from all sides of the business. And we'll definitely get into the details of that throughout the episode. So maybe for the listeners that are just joining us, we can kind of officially start off with a proper intro. I know you've done this with me a few times, so maybe we got it down to a well-rehearsed few paragraphs about your background, how you got into the industry, when you realized there was some efficiencies not available, and how you came around to addressing those, and how you're now looking into the future with what you learned.
Yeah.
Note and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background's in software engineering. I've been doing that for quite a lot of years. Worked at a great company, still good friends and fellow travelers. The company's called Cognitect. It was called Relevance before that, then it changed its name to Cognitect. It's the company that sort of builds and stewards the Clojure programming language. So Rich Hickey, the creator of Clojure, was CTO there, worked with Stu Holloway, Tim Ewald, a bunch of really great people on the product team at Cognitect. We were building a database called Datomic, and that was where I first sort of got my exposure to the advantages of event sourcing and how building time as a first, time and state change as sort of first class constructs and principles in your software architecture were essentially important, right? From there, moved on, did some startups and stuff, went to Capital One as a distinguished engineer there. Was engineer at Capital One for a lot of years, solving hard banking problems. Capital One, I was advocating while I was there for streaming data, event sourcing, gathering up kind of the various disparate threads of the customer journey across, credit cards and auto finance and the retail bank and mortgages, and there's like we saw our customers' financial life in this sort of very fragmented way, and I was advocating there as a technology fellow for unifying that, using streaming data, using event sourcing to really gather up the threads of our customer journey and understanding it in a more holistic way, which is obviously sort of event centric. And then I got the wild idea, like, hey, I can probably do this myself, right? I can do this for other customers. So I started Evident Systems about 3 years ago, and have been doing just that, helping first professional services customers use event sourcing and event-driven system design better. And then we started embarking on our own product journeys, and we used event sourcing and event streaming and event-centric design sort of extensively throughout not only our professional services work, but also our own internal product development work. And it was great. There was huge advantages to be gained. We can go into those later, and I'm sure that's sort of the main content we want to dig into. But huge advantages for our consulting clients, certainly, and also for our own very small kind of lean product shop. We just got a lot of advantages from using event-centric design. And really that culminated in finding event modeling. We saw some of Adam's very early YouTube work and some of the meetups really early on. And we had been doing event storming, both at Capital One and after the fact. And event storming had always left me a little unsatisfied at the end of the output artifact wasn't quite as satisfying or as actionable and concrete as many of our consulting customers and our own product development efforts required. Finding event modeling was this dramatic simplification. It sort of hit all the pain points that I had with other lightweight design methodologies. And it was great. So we started using it in our professional services work, and it was really great. We helped a major US tax preparation service, using event modeling. We did some 2-day sessions with them. We got to these nice software designs. And we really saw something in event modeling. And then again, sort of the output artifact from like pen and paper event modeling really left something to be desired for us. It was fragile. It really only supported the design process and didn't help us in the later stages of the software development lifecycle. So we set out to make our own tool just to help us, kind of scratch our own itch, really, help us do event modeling better. And we found that there was interest in that, and we sort of opened it up to the community last August. And before that, I guess maybe April or May, it seems like, started conversations with Adam, just letting him know what we were doing, what we're up to, and the response has been really great. The response from the community has been really great. We're closing in really quickly on our 1,000 users, which is really great. Anyway, so we're, it's grown really fast, sort of faster than we anticipated. There's been really great demand from the community, and we're really excited to see, how we can help the event modeling community progress the state of the art, really expand the use of event modeling to the rest of the software worlds. We really see a lot of advantages to what you've created, Adam, event modeling and the sort of disciplined and structured approach to state change.
Thank you. It's nice to talk about this stuff, but to have someone push through and actually build on it is the next stage. So it's a team effort, and I really appreciate you understanding, and obviously thankful that you were able to, use the methodology to help yourself through challenges. But then also the next part is executing on the automation of that, which is nothing easy. And so we can get into some of the core problem spaces that you needed to solve, such as collaboration online. You just didn't pull a library off the shelf to use. You actually implemented Martin Kleppmann's CRDTs within the solution, so that if people are familiar with Martin Kleppmann and his work in and around LinkedIn and scalability and databases and parallel processing, all sorts of things that he talks about, and he's got a Cambridge PhD in and around CRDT, his CRDT work, I guess. So maybe fill us in on kind of like what makes ONote special, and
Yeah.
why solving these problems are really important, and just trying to piggyback off of something that's kind of like generic, like Miro, which seems to do everything for everyone. Why specifically using CRDTs in the context of synchronizing an event model between participants gives them an edge. So something you definitely felt you needed to do. So maybe fill us
Yeah.
in why.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we set out to make ONote, we wanted a canvas where we could do event modeling, and we needed it to be collaborative because event modeling is sort of intrinsically a collaborative effort. We saw sort of two phases of that collaboration. There was sort of the upfront kind of workshop moment where you've got lots of people, different skill sets, changes coming really fast and thick, and you're sort of incorporating these changes. It's a lot more free form. It's kind of the Wild West. You're just getting, from zero to at least a working model. And then there's sort of the second phase of that where you're in implementation. The changes are coming more slowly and evolutionarily. It's the implementing team is making these changes rather than just kind of everyone who is at the workshop. And these changes are happening, over months instead of over minutes. So there's sort of these two different collaborative moments that we wanted to support in ONote. The other thing that was really important to us in ONote is that we weren't just drawing a picture, right? There's a ton of really great picture drawing apps out there, right? Miro and Lucid Spark, and there's all these different sort of collaborative whiteboard texts, which basically just kind of lift and shift the in-person analog, sticky notes and butcher paper version of event modeling onto the web. But you're not building a data model. You're not building anything that's semantic, right? You're just drawing a picture instead of on your whiteboard. You're drawing it on a digital whiteboard. It's not buying you a ton that way. And we knew that we wanted to end up with something that wasn't just a picture, but something that had a data structure behind it, a data representation of this blueprint of an information system, right? So we wanted to have event models, not just as a picture, but as a data structure. So those two, balancing sort of those two requirements and those desires on our part, we decided, hey, there's nothing out there that just does this off the shelf, right? This isn't just a collaborative drawing problem. This is a collaborative data structure building problem, right? And so to that end, we decided to go with a CRDT because that's exactly what CRDTs are for, is converging on a single data structure, that, a value of a data structure, regardless of what order those changes arrive in and who's making those changes and so forth. You always, you want all participants to arrive at the same data structure, right? The picture that we're drawing is really just a projection, right? In the CRDT world, it's sort of both the place where you can issue commands about, changing the structure of the diagram. And those commands are graphical and you're dragging stuff around on a screen. And it's sort of a projection of the read model. It's a graphical projection of this data structure that we have behind the scenes. But there's this whole loop behind it where we're actually, building this data structure and maintaining its integrity.
Even from the perspective of just the amount of information to synchronize, if you have a generic approach to every line and circle on the on the canvas, it seems like that would be a lot more to synchronize when you can take advantage of the fact that you have this core structure underneath that's driving all of the importance of where something is, whereas editing the font of something is less important than the fact that it connects to another state change or something like that. So your CRDT can evolve to be a little bit more in tune with how people are actually collaborating on the state changes across time, which is what event modeling is, and not letting the tool get choked up on the details. Maybe the font is wrong, but that's okay because we got the gist of what's going on and the important parts, such as what the next step is in our workflow.
Yeah, exactly. And by using this custom data structure and the event modeling business rules around that data structure, right? It represents a read model. The event model itself, getting super meta real quick. The event model itself is our read model, right? That's one of the key read models we're building. But there's all these other events that we're, seeing happen both in the UI and, during collaboration. Some things happen server side, and there's all these other things happening. But this, this artifact that we're building together, this read model or this event model, that's the important thing, right? That's the bit that, that's kind of the artifact that comes out of the end of this business process. And we wanted that to follow business rules, right? One of the other big problems we see with Miro and some of the other whiteboarding technologies is that it's just an arbitrary picture, right? Like, unless you have an expert facilitator like Adam or folks at AdaptTech in the room helping you draw this picture, the picture you end up with like may or may not actually be an event model, right? It could just be some arbitrary picture, part architecture diagram, part workflow sort of, hacked together thing, right? So we wanted to constrain that modeling canvas so that the business rules are built in so that when you're drawing a connection from a UI element to a command, that it's just that, right? You can't draw a line from a command directly to a read model because that's not semantic. That's not how event modeling works, sort of at the semantic level. So that's the other thing that we wanted to have was, certainly during the design moment where you're drawing this picture together, but also for later use cases that we'll talk about, code generation and data completeness auditing and security auditing and operational metrics, being overlaid on top of this blueprint in real time. Like all of those things require that you have a semantically valid model. So we wanted to make sure that up front, we were helping our users by constraining the modeling canvas with these business rules. We're helping our users build valid event models right out of the gate. So they're not just building some picture that's half event model, half, architecture diagram or whatever, right?
So let's say fast forward, we do have an event model that everyone is satisfied with. Who is everyone? So, this is one of the key things you noticed about the approach of needing to have collaboration. And maybe we can see now where ONode starts to allow the event model to be a tool for not just architects, and where event-driven approaches have sort of focused around just architecture and technical elitism, I would say, in some cases where we have maybe even ivory tower, or we have a lot more people that can say how the system should work now, and we welcome that. How does it affect their workflows? For example, a product owner, a product manager, a CEO even, or someone like a customer service rep. There's you talked before about some of these advantages of where this actually starts to overflow and start to help other roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's sort of the two different collaborative moments that we sort of identified, or use cases. There's sort of the upfront workshop thing, and then there's this longer, more gradual, evolution of the model. And we wanted collaboration and sort of the underlying data structure and CRDTs and things that help us version that data structure. We wanted those things to support both of those use cases. But in that workshop moment up front, that's a great opportunity to get other voices, right? Sometimes we get like a little myopic as software engineers and architects. We're thinking about a small set of concerns when this system doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? We're not just writing software for the sake of writing software because it's fun. We're writing software to satisfy a business need, to satisfy a group of users, to help them solve a problem that they have. And unless we're doing that, our software is not successful. And oftentimes we're not the best people to measure whether our software is serving its intended purpose, right? That's marketing, or that's, your product experts, or that's your CEO who's looking at the financial performance of your company, right? Like all of the other stakeholders need to have a voice in the process as well. And, Agile made some promises about doing that. Look, in practice, who's on stand-up? It's the software engineers, right? You don't have the business stakeholders on stand-up because it's disruptive to their work and they don't understand what's going on. And they get very little value out of that interaction. Whereas something like event modeling, you're building a blueprint. And I think this is one of the genius sort of design elements that you incorporate into event modeling, Adam, is it's a high enough level view of an information system that anyone can understand it, right? There's 4 constructs. So there's only 4 words, visual words you have to learn. And they only connect in a handful of ways. And, so the pictures end up kind of looking like the customer's experience over time and how the information changes over time, which business users get, right? Like it's just the narrative of your user's interaction with the system, which is how most people think outside of, us software engineers. So
it's about the storification of any kind of requirements, right? So we have,
that's right. It's like building a storyboard for a film.
Yeah, because nothing's really new in tech these days. I mean, everything that we pretty much think about or think is new has already been tried somewhere. So, in order to be truly original somewhere, I make no bones about it. This is kind of like what UML set out to do, right? And we just decided to leave certain parts out and include certain things like UI in it. People would say, hey, this is just like a sequence diagram, sort of. Well, yeah, it is, but it's leaving out those things that trip up the other people in the other roles
That's right.
that may make it inaccessible to those things. So again, what is innovation but improvement on previous ideas?
Yep.
And of course, some people have already drawn similarities with event storming, etc. And all that. And sure enough, yeah, they do share some things, but we certainly leave certain pieces out, and we certainly make sure that specification by example with real data across a timeline, no branching, and certain things like that make what you said, that story, be really like a storyboard. Because
Yep.
if we actually analyze what a storyboard is compared to some traditional specifications, use cases, user stories,
Yeah.
all of those different things we've done, they try to not, I mean, they try to, some of them do specification by example, but I think they're missing a whole bunch of pieces. And so, from my perspective, I don't want to take over this episode, but it was really born of a place where we didn't really have the resources to really put together a consulting company with roles such as PMs, architects, testers, etc. We needed to share all of those duties, and therefore we needed to work with a canvas that allowed to act as the blueprint, so that we could fulfill all of those things without having to hire 5 extra people. We just didn't have the money for it. And so through these struggles is where you kind of quote unquote find innovation, if you dare call it that. I think it's about making things more efficient and cutting out things that are not necessary. And so yeah, I think what you've done here now in terms of the reality of what that is. So if I am a project manager, how does ONote in a month or two or whatever help me manage my project, right? That's one of those questions.
Yeah.
Kind of leading you into the next.
Yeah. Well, I want to address something you said as well, and then we'll sort of proceed to that question. Like I was saying, sort of event modeling really strikes this nice balance between being high enough level for project managers and UI UX designers and business stakeholders and so forth to be able to see it, meaningfully contribute to it, understand it, but also being specific enough to be actionable by the software engineers, right? It's not just this high level picture that obscures all the actual, gritty realities of software engineering. And the software engineers take one look at it and they're like, well, this doesn't tell me anything, right? Like, I already knew this much about the domain. This doesn't help me. Event modeling is not that, right? Event modeling is very well specified. You have these nice sort of slices of system functionality where you can really decompose the system into a set of contracts that, hey, once we've fulfilled all these contracts, the system's ready to go, right? So anyway, so it strikes this really nice balance, and elegance in a product is not when anything more can be added, but when nothing further can be removed, right? And that's what event modeling feels like to me. It's simple, and it reaches that nice balance between allowing for broad contribution, collaboration, but also being well specified and actionable by the people who are doing the actual implementation work. So, to your question about how do other stakeholders participate, say a project manager, when we have the ONote modeling canvas where we're drawing the picture, certainly they can contribute during the workshop, later during this more incremental changing and implementation phase of your project. They can interrogate that diagram, they can push on it, they can challenge assumptions, they can redraw pieces of it to meet customer feedback and user testing feedback. They can close that loop by changing the model. But they also because we have this because we have this data structure, it's not just a diagram, it's a data structure behind the scenes. We can go a step further to help the project managers and actually carve up the event model into tasks, right? So you don't have to have a separate user story or jobs to be done, kind of generation ritual where we have to sit down and, okay, let's think about the requirements of the system and rephrase them into these discrete bundles of work. That's already done, right? That's done mechanically by the process of building out this blueprint, right? So you build the event model. This feature isn't ready yet. We anticipate having it, later this year, but we'll be able to sort of carve up a diagram into the discrete tasks, include, design and specification by example, within those task definitions, and then put those task definitions somewhere, maybe Jira or GitHub issues, or, wherever it is that your team tracks their work. We can put those issues in there. And then to close the loop, as we burn those issues down in Jira and complete them, we can visualize that the completeness of the software, right on an overlay on top of your event model. So your event model becomes a blueprint not only for how the system's supposed to work, but also the timeline of how are we doing on completing the system, right? You can start to visualize and show to your superiors and other people who are interested in the progress of the system. You can show them, hey, this is how much of the system's done, right? All the areas that are bright are things that we've built, things that are still dim are things we haven't built yet. And we can start testing the value of these discrete pieces, before the system's done. We can identify the MVP, based on what we feel like we can release without other pieces being ready and all those things. So there's a lot that we can do to support the team and the project management and sort of those stakeholders are interested in the completion and when is this going to be done. Just right from the event model, again, because it's not a picture, it's a full sort of data structure representing your information system.
Right, and one of the parallels that I saw while kind of coming up with inadvertently event modeling was this functional point analysis. And so I guess crossing functional point analysis from the early 2000s, when we were still doing Gantt charts and putting features into Excel and marking them off as green having been done. But really this functional point analysis is a lot better served by state changes over time. And so cross-pollinating the idea of a functional point analysis with the idea of event sourcing and multiple models, which are there, like even if you're doing traditional development, you have multiple models, but you're trying to let one set of tables address all of them. And so now your models, quote unquote, are different queries where we get into trouble because of you repeat yourself on third normal form, which we've taken a little bit too far.
Yeah.
But, we digress. So in terms of, a project manager being able to just color in and check off certain parts of the workflow as a feature, and we already see that with the current tooling where people paste in Jira tickets. I looked forward to the day where you don't need to use Jira at all because the information is pretty much there. Any discussion actually always happens in that collaborative canvas, so that we have the full transparency as to what any issues exist within any parts of the system. And if you're working on another part, you kind of can see how far away you are removed from that problem, or whether you have a train heading your way. You got to help things out because you're going to be in the path of anything that went wrong down the path before you, or maybe you're going to be setting up a disaster in the workflow after you. So you can relate those things. Maybe what in your experience and with dealing with technical issues along with project managers, where does that kind of conversation take place? How does that conversation take place? And in your experience, even before ONote, how did you do that? And how are you pushing that a little bit more? I know you went over it a little bit, but I think that there's a little nuance there that I want to catch.
Sure. Yeah. So one of our goals with ONote is to sort of meet developers where they are now, right? So a lot of our integrations that we have planned, code generation, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, later, but this project management integration that we're talking about now, we do want to sort of meet developers where they are this minute. I think there is sort of that next level step where it's like, okay, cut out the middleman, you get rid of your external, tracking tools like Jira or whatever, and do everything within ONote. I think there's a world where we can do that. I've been really encouraged, and I'm sort of a strong believer in looking back to older management technologies and philosophies that we've sort of overlooked or misapplied in software. So I like the DevOps movements, return to, Eli Goldratt and the goal and theory of constraints and critical chain theory, and some of these things where it's like, okay, these ideas have proven themselves really well in the manufacturing worlds. It's not going to look exactly the same, but maybe we can learn from some of those same lessons in software. So I like the DevOps movements sort of bringing those things back and challenging those ideas in the software context. I think there is a lot we can learn from those management philosophies about delivering software on time, delivering it on a predictable schedule, delivering it with feature completeness and high quality, right? Like we're still not there yet. Agile made a bunch of promises about that. Like we're still not there. And so I think the sort of project management aspect of software delivery can use the help. So I think event modeling is a tool to help us get there. I think there would be different views, not just the event modeling canvas, where we see the blueprint of the software itself, but I think slicing the back end data model a different way, we can start to look at critical chains of tasks so that you can understand, like, are we going to cause a problem downstream of us in this project? We can start to look at dependencies among the slices and see, like, okay, we can't do this slice until this slice is complete due to some technical constraint or something. So what does that dependency do to our delivery date, right? I think there's a lot more scientific management we can get into when we have a nice specification like an event model that we're building toward, and not this sort of open-ended, like, well, any requirement can change at any minute, so like we can't make any promises. But like, people have applied some of the agile methodologies that way, where it's like, yeah, well, we're giving up on due dates. We're just going to sort of build until you tell us to stop, right? That's not great from a management perspective, right?
Yeah, so there's still a lot of suffering in developing software out there.
Yeah,
a lot of subjectivity, which I make a point of mentioning. So
yeah.
Agile, I think, was complaining about not being given the fair chance, and the belly aching of these traditionalists are not allowing us to work in sprints, etc. I think the tables have totally flipped now in the industry, where we have the go-to practice is all the agile practices that we have out there, Scrum, Kanban, and for startups we have the lean approaches and all sorts of things that are just, this is the best way to do things. So we've gone from one extreme of extremist kind of tautologies and echo chambers and all these things to another. And so it's always healthy to find the balance between extremes, where we can really be truly quote unquote agile and flexible into what we do. And I think just like we had high hopes for agile, we also back in the day had high hopes for Gantt charts, and we had high hopes for PMP practices, and we had high hopes for UML, that it's going to be doing all of these things. And I think when we analyze those things, we look at just how far they are in terms of being out of the way for convenience of use in many other practices. So someone that's a traditional architect or engineer, highly technical person, they might not feel very, safe in terms of acting in an agile stand-up or something like that. They just know that they have things to build like an architect, and they really don't want to do that. And vice versa, it's the same thing the other way for people that are trying to manage a project. And so finding this balance, I think it requires a larger audience, which I think we addressed, and having the tooling to support it. And I think ONode is the premier product that's doing exactly that, is making those bridges, making everyone feel welcome, allowing a platform to replace that. So also we're not, there's an interesting thing that we always kind of talk about, which is this is just another tool. True. I mean, you could have a Swiss Army knife, or you could have a 200-pound tool belt with drills and all sorts of things around you. You're going to run a little faster with the Swiss Army knife in your pocket. And I think that's what ONode is really becoming, is a really good Swiss Army knife of just enough tooling for so many different purposes, that if you need to, if you're conscious about costs, and I think a lot of companies are very conscious about costs in terms of hiring extra positions or needing to do extra processes or extra tooling, this is a really good way to mitigate those and go quite a lot further with very little imposed on your teams or on your system in terms of what it takes to get going. So I really thank you again for doing this, because it's the next chapter, and I'm really looking forward to the next the next pieces. So maybe we can at this point say, what can people do and join? I know you have a new event that you're going to be scheduling quite often, so maybe we can talk about that as to how people can get involved with what's going on with your efforts, with the processes that you're supporting through ONote, and the actual mechanics of ONote itself and the features that are coming, and of course people to give you feedback and converse with you about those things.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple sort of big pieces of news of what we've accomplished over the last couple of months, where we see ourselves heading in the next few. Big piece of news number one is we're going to start a monthly webinar series. So our first one is coming up next week. We'll include a link to that webinar in the show notes. And it's going to be a really informal event. It's not going to be, we did a really great webinar with Adam and Martin Kleppman where we talked about CRDT and some of the nerdy technical stuff. This is going to be not that. This is going to be much more, we want to engage with our community. We want to keep you informed as to what we just finished, what you can expect over the next couple of months, kind of where we see our roadmap heading, any changes to the roadmap, because that always happens, obviously. But yeah, we want to just sort of engage on a regular cadence with our users and say, hey, here's what we've built in ONote. Here's the new stuff that you can explore and see. We're going to also, augment those webinars with some emails that we'll send out when we release something so that you can play around with it. Some in-app notifications. We do plan to add that at some point, where even within the application itself, you can see what's new since the last time you used the app and that sort of thing. So we want to sort of engage with our community so that we can communicate about what we're doing, but also so we can hear from the community, what features do you care most about? What's holding you back from upgrading? Are you having any bugs? Those types of things we want to hear. So there'll be sort of a broadcast portion of that webinar where we're talking and talking about what we've done recently, and then and where the roadmap's headed. And then there'll also be like a Q&A section of that as well, where we can talk about questions people have about features, concerns, any of that stuff we can address there as well. So that's sort of big piece of news number one. We do plan to have these what's new with ONote touch points. Second big piece of news, we talked about collaboration at our last webinar. That was kind of back in, what was that, November, December. We've sort of finally rolled out collaboration as a generally available feature. We tested it. We released it to limited groups kind of in the weeks following our announcement there. That is now generally available. So collaboration is available. Along with that comes our first paid tier, ONote Essential. You will have to upgrade to ONote Essential in order to initiate collaboration sessions. And by upgrading to ONote Essential, it also removes the limitation on the number of event models you can manage and a few other nice features like that. More features will be coming to ONote Essential, like schema management, code generation over the next few months. So ONote Essential is kind of our first paid upgrade, and we're excited about that. We'll also include a link in the show notes about that you can just click, to take you right within the ONote app of how you would upgrade. We'll include in that link promo code that you can use, and you can get free, a couple of free months of ONote Essential, so you can test it out and make sure that there's enough value to justify the payment. So you won't have to pay up front. You'll be able to defer those payments for a couple of months.
Well, that's great. So just so people know that the current tier there is, to participate on collaborations is free, but to initiate one is not, and that's how you run the business and do that. So again, I really support ways of collaborating with open formats. Now there is an open format that we're slowly working towards, that is that standard for the event models themselves, so that we have those opinions of events, supply information to projections or views or reports and things like that. And so having that openness is really, really good. And of course, all the work that you're doing needs to be paid for somehow. So just like we support really good IDEs that help us, do our work in a much better way, it really influences how much, our work is worth. In the same way, ONote is like an IDE for business. To be
for
able
the team, it's like the team's IDE.
Exactly, to be able to work more efficiently and not spend 3 weeks trying to wrestle with one another in front of various whiteboards with various teams, and get rid of that month of wrestling with, a couple of days of highly valuable collaboration. I mean, if you look at, the, what one senior developer charges per hour, you make up the costs in like an hour.
Yeah.
Or a fraction of that.
We did sort of an analysis on that. We're looking at, so at a very high level, our roadmap this year is we want to have kind of one great feature in each of the kind of broad phases of the software development lifecycle. So during design, our big feature that we've already released is collaboration. We think that that's key. During implementation, it's schema management and code generation. We think that that's sort of the killer feature. So we'll be building towards that the first half of this year. And then during operations, we think it's being able to visualize real-time operational metrics right on top of the blueprint for the system. So how many of this type of event are we getting per second? And if something's down, can we visualize that breakage, on the model itself, right? So just sort of incorporating that operational telemetry back into the diagram. We think that those are the sort of the three big killer features that we're going to work on this year. Within that, there's a whole bunch of other little features that we're going to be, adding and that are dependencies on getting to those places. But just looking at those things, plus project management, which is another feature, we don't know when that's going to slot in, but the project management feature that we've already described, just looking at like an average team of say 5 developers and a PM, if we can save that team, a week on the project management stuff, right? So instead of sitting around having developers who are paying a ton per hour, write user stories for a week, if we can just save that time and just mechanically derive the tasks from the model, we think that saves a week of development time for the 5 engineers and the PM.
That's a lot.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of money. Yeah, that's a lot of money.
That's 5 figures at least.
Yes. And then we think that with the code generation stuff, where we can generate, say, a GraphQL schema or a protobufs, IDL, so that you can generate a gRPC system in your language of choice, or an OpenAPI Swagger specification, so you can use the OpenAPI tooling, like Swagger first tooling in your language of choice to ingest that model and generate an application. Just writing all that mundane code that your development team's written 1,000 times to like stand up a project and to find web service endpoints and connect those web service endpoints to some sort of service function or object or whatever, like just that like scaffolding stuff, that takes, 5 weeks of development time or something like that. So if we can just save those 6 weeks of development time with our tooling, we think that and event modeling like pays for itself in the first project, right?
Yeah, plus it doesn't have to be your opinion. I mean, the idea that supporting multiple languages and things like that, it's if you already have an existing set of solutions where you have some of those endpoints done, for example, with your payment provider or with your authentication system. I mean, those are templates you're plugging in. So any new projects that you spin up with ONote magically work, and not to Bobby's opinion, but to what you need for your company. Right? Yeah, I think is a sweet spot.
In fact, we have one customer that we're working with right now. Really exciting domain that they're working in. They're kind of in the payment space, and they use a language called Elixir. And Elixir has some inbuilt code generation capabilities like native to the language. So the way that they support various standards like JSON parsing or some of these other common standards is that they have code generation, and they actually like link to RFCs and derive the implementation directly, like mechanically, from the RFCs and from the open specifications that are available. So by making this open data format that we've been talking about, Adam, this is what an event model looks like in JSON, and our ONote tool can export this JSON format. By making that available, this customer got really excited because they're like, we can take that JSON, build Elixir code generators to hook into our own processes, right? Things that are native to us, our authentication system, our event stores, our, right? They've already got all this infrastructure and stuff up. They have a working product. They're, $1 billion startup, right? If they can just mechanically derive implementations of an event model from the data structure, that's a huge acceleration for them.
Yeah, especially if you're moving towards event-driven systems. I mean, we talked about this as being just fine for traditional systems, but once you start doing auditable systems with immutable data and really having this ledger-like approach, a lot of that tooling isn't ready as
Yeah.
it is with traditional stacks out there.
Yep.
So if you're using maybe something that's based on Kafka or Event Store DB, you probably are stuck with having to do a lot of the infrastructure yourself.
Yeah.
And perhaps as you're starting off new projects, it's not as simple as copy paste, although some people are good at that. It would be really good then to have those new tools and databases and products already integrated in that work being done. But then for new projects, it really should just flow from talking about your information flow, plugging in that authentication at the beginning,
Yep.
plugging in that payment part at the end, and not spend, that's a lot of cases that can be 50% of the project cost. And it's awesome when you can retain that control to be still within your company and not have to, have that, well, we were told buy is better than build, but what we built was already working and it's pretty solid and we like the control. It's not a one or the other. You could have both. And I think extending how easily you can reuse your own workflow pieces and parts of it really and compose it to something for a new thing is going to really save a lot of time, like you said, especially spinning up yet another project. But this team is working differently and, they might introduce slight variations which are not worthwhile. But, with maybe event-driven systems, you can decorate some extra functionality without really hurting the core. So all this kind of, sharing of these previous workflow steps is going to be available for your company and how you work, not something that gets, imposed upon you by a framework.
Yeah,
exactly. I think
exactly.
really good.
Well, and that whole word reuse and software, I think we could have like a podcast episode just on the word reuse, right?
Course,
because reuse, for a lot of years was sort of a goal in itself, right? We're going to reuse because we want to reuse software, right? And it, those approaches to reuse, especially like in object-oriented programming, where we imagine to ourselves that we're going to reuse the person class, with it, across different projects. Like, no, you're not. Like, reuse at the code level is a fantasy. Like, it has never materialized. It's never provided value. And the degree of coupling and dependencies among teams that it introduces always dominate, often by a factor of 10x, the value of the reuse itself.
Yeah.
But then you have reuse at sort of the business capability level, the workflow step reuse. And that's tremendously valuable. And with event-driven systems, with event modeling and your approaches to that, it introduces very little coupling and very little dependencies among teams. So it sort of inverts this whole conversation about reuse that we had in the early days of OO. Obviously hasn't borne fruit, obviously is like a non-goal at this point, right?
Oh, yeah.
But reuse at sort of the business capabilities level, the workflow step level, that's much more economically viable, clearly more valuable, more feasible, right? So we can start reintroducing this idea of economic reuse of business capabilities through software without talking about like, okay, I'll share my classes with you and we'll have one enterprise domain model where everyone's using the same set of classes to build their systems. It's like, okay, that didn't work, but there is a level of reuse that can work, and I think it's the one that you're talking about right now.
And I think in terms of reuse and engineering aspect of putting together, information systems, automating information systems, the idea that one type of company might be more beneficial to use ONode versus another. A lot of times we get that question: who's your ideal customer? Which kind of company? We kind of talked about some of the types of companies that this would be really useful for. I certainly see it as useful for every company, but people won't accept that as an answer. So I want to hear it from you. Like, who's the ideal customer for ONode? Is it just the startup? Is it the Capital One that needs to have a firmer process and gather in all the complexity to something more tangible and more easily managed? So I'll leave it for you to answer that.
Yeah. So the way we identify our customer is not necessarily by industry or by maturity, right? So it's not financial services and it's not, startups versus, enterprises. The way that we identify it is folks that have companies that have dipped their toe into the sort of this event-driven waters a little bit, right? So whatever it is behind the scenes that's driving this compelling business need to see their systems in an event-centric way rather than in a database-centric way. Like for us, that's the big jump, right? If you can break out of your sort of database-centric thinking and start thinking in terms of events. So we look at people who have, used Apache Kafka, who are, maybe Confluent customers, people who have invested in Event Store DB, people who are looking at Axon IQ, right? Those buying decisions signal to us like, hey, at least someone internally is seeing the event-driven future, and they're seeing that that's the way that the world's headed, and the plethora of advantages that we've discussed on this call or on this podcast. Right, there's a ton of advantages, but I don't want to have to teach some enterprise what those advantages are. Right, that's a non-starter for me. We're a tiny startup. We've got this product. Like I don't have time to like educate everyone on the advantages of event-driven. So we look for companies that have already maybe bought the infrastructure or invested in some of the developer skills, or if you've bought Confluent or if you're using Kafka or Event Store DB, that's a really clear signal that you see someone internally has already made this leap and they see the event-driven future. What most of those enterprises are lacking is any clear way of communicating about or thinking about these event-driven systems in a systematic sort of methodological way, right? We have great tooling. To your point, we have great tooling for database-centric systems, right? We've got ERDs and we've got, RDBMS like admin and management tools and design tools where you can draw these pictures. We have a lot of that tooling and developer mind share and experience around database-centric systems. We really don't around event-centric systems. So that's where a lot of these companies need help, is like, look, we've committed to using Apache Kafka or we've bought Confluent, but we're only using it in a couple places. It's mostly kind of a data engineering thing where we're using it to like schlep data around, but we're not designing our systems to take advantage of these new capabilities in terms of event logging. So we think that that's where event modeling can really help companies, is, hey, look, this isn't just for big data. This isn't just for analytics. This isn't just for, moving data around behind the scenes. You can really start to design your systems around these events, and everything gets a little better when you do it that way. So just showing, people who have already committed in some way to event-driven thinking, showing them that there's a way to design, there's a way to communicate about these systems, there's a way to visualize the design of these information systems. That's really where I think event modeling shines.
Yeah, you mentioned a key point there, is the investment in using the information flow as the backbone of the architecture, information architecture at least, and seeing that the other parts of the system and the company really are there to support that information flow, because that's essentially where the value comes in from your system.
Mm-hmm.
People use your system to get something out of it. And you have to trace where that comes from, how it ends up being cajoled together, and things like that. So, I mean, is there any other? We kind of had about an hour of this. I'd like to have some time to kind of discuss what the audience is asking, and have some participation with some questions or ideas from the audience, and maybe something I missed in my questions that someone else noticed. I'd like to see if we can get that addressed at some point. And maybe last few words that you want to talk about, some of those important dates that you mentioned, some of the more important ways you can get involved. I know we have an ONode channel on the event modeling Slack, which you can get at through the Slack invite button on the eventmodeling.org/resources page. And I'll leave it to you to kind of close up kind of these loose ends that maybe I didn't get to, and then we'll take some questions from our little peanut gallery here that gathers every Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wednesday, February 3rd, that's our first what's new with ONode. So we'll include a link again when we send this content out. It'll come with a link to that webinar registration. So that's our next big date. And we'll have a lot more to say about kind of our roadmap and what's coming next and what we've done in the past month or so on that forum. So yeah, I think that's the next big date. And then my last sort of shameless plug, upgrade to ONote Essential now, and we'll have a link there as well that includes a promo code, so you can get a couple months free with that as well. We're really interested in hearing from our earliest paid users. We've got a nice chunk of the user base that has upgraded, and so we're getting good feedback from some of those folks. So we're just interested to hear from these earliest users. So we want to give you some months free. Use it, tell us what's wrong with it, help us make it better. So we definitely want to sort of compensate our users and not put both the financial burden and the sort of early product adoption burden on them. So we're anxious to work with our initial users on that. So that's why we have the promo code.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that very informative update on where things are, and for people that are hearing about ONote for the first time, hopefully that's a really good way for them to understand the reasoning why it exists and what value it gives. So urge those people to really try it out as soon as possible. Really great community of people that are moving the industry forward. So thank you, Bobby. And now we'll open up some of the questions. Actually, we have Greg Young typing in on YouTube. So he's obviously always asking about versioning. It is very important in terms of schemas and how you do that. Obviously, closing of the books and all these types of strategies in event-sourced systems, being able to move on to the next version of events to keep your system moving along and evolving with your needs is critical. There are some things that are maybe not as apparent to people that are coming in for the first time to event larger distributed systems where you have the idea of a public schema that is used, for example, on a bus like Kafka to be the contract between multiple services versus internal events, domain events that are, as we call them in different disciplines, of tracking the very state of an individual service. So event versioning is an interesting thing. Bobby, what's your take on event versioning and retiring some events, replacing them with new ones, mapping them?
Sure.
How do we show that? I mean, to me, on pen and paper, I copy paste the entire system. Not on pen and paper, but drawing tools. Nice drawing tools. I would copy the entire thing and adjust it and say, this is version 1 now, this is version 2. I would identify the events that are different, and I would have to integrate that with the fact that I'm storing the old versions and have to map to them. So what's your take on all of that?
Sure.
I certainly have my opinion, but what's yours?
Well, and this question is coming from Greg Young, who literally wrote a book about versioning in event source systems, right? So far be it from me. Bobby. Yeah, right. Far be it from me to contradict Greg, right? I mean, he's forgotten more about this subject than I'll probably ever know. But
just a shout out to him. Obviously, he has a book on event versioning that's available on LeanPub that is really goes into the nitty gritty of the many strategies of rewriting events, if you dare do that, and the pros and cons of that. But what's your take?
Sure. Yeah. And so a lot of my guidance that I've given to that I've used on my own products and given to my clients, from professional services perspective, follows a lot of what Greg has written, right? So didn't need to reinvent that particular wheel, but I'll couch that with the fact that because we do have a data structure in ONote, we'll at least be able to do so. There was a great talk by Rich Hickey called Speculation. Rich is clearly a mentor of mine. He gave a talk called Speculation where he talks about versioning. He sort of like poo-poos Semver. So if you want some controversy, if you want some controversy and get into a little bit of a religious war, like you can watch that talk and agree or disagree with what he says about Semver. But what he basically says is that there's only 2 categories of changes in a system, right? There's changes that break me and changes that don't break me. I don't care about the changes that don't break me, right? I care passionately about the changes that do break me. So using set theory and category theory and regular expression theory, so not string regular expressions, but like the actual math behind how string regular expressions work, there's actually a lot that we can do mechanically to detect when we have a breaking change, right? So I imagine a future, like we don't have any near-term plans for this, but I do imagine a future in ONote where as you're making changes, that generates a new version in ONote because we're using a version data structure in CRDT. And, if you make a change that introduces an information flow breakage, we can highlight that and be like, you probably don't want to commit this change because this breaks people, right?
Yeah, highlight the fallout of that change in red or something. So everything to the right all of a sudden starts to turn red.
Right, everything starts flashing.
Which screens are going to have incomplete data, where you're going to have,
so
it's starting to look like a theory prover kind of.
Yeah, a little bit, and a lot of that we can do again just mechanically with some set theory and with some regular expression theory about detecting these breaking changes. And for non-breaking changes, like I don't think anyone cares, right? You can make those changes till the cows come home, and nobody's even going to know about it, right? If I add a field to my event, nobody downstream of me should care about that, right? Because it's just more information, right? If you
Greg definitely goes into that in his book about you're just adding more, and there's an argument he has against strong typing versus all that kind of stuff, where you kind of want to be a little bit more loosey-goosey in certain aspects and not have strong typing, and other places you want strong typing.
That's right. So for getting a new key on a map, when the map shows up at my door, like I don't care. So if you're providing more to me or requiring less of me, it's a non-breaking category change. If you're providing less to me or requiring more of me, that is a breaking category change. And there's really only the two categories, right? So with math, we can determine which category a particular change could be in. And then for, probably 90% of the changes you want to make, they're non-breaking changes, and it's fine. For that breaking category of change, we need to highlight, and then you can mitigate those changes with some of the techniques that Greg advocates, replay events out of topic version 1 into topic version 2, subject to some transformer that updates the schema of all the events or whatever you need to do, right? So there's a lot of different techniques that Greg goes into in his book that you can apply once you've identified a breaking change. But if it's not a breaking change, that's my theory. That's my thoughts on the subject.
Okay. Now we have some people that joined live. Obviously, we have the folks from AdaptTech here. That we deal with Event Store on a day-to-day basis and event-driven systems, and we use event modeling day-to-day. I do it all week long and even on weekends. So as do the other guys. But we also have a couple of other folks here. Like I know Rick Rupp is a regular on our meetup, and he always has a good insight on the problem solution space perspective, and has done a lot of stuff on the agile side. So he's our bridge into how we move agile to be more used in context with event modeling on a day-to-day basis. So there's quite a few people here. So I'll whoever wants to raise their hand or unmute their mic and ask a question, feel free. Also the YouTube channel. Anyone that's watching there, just type in your question in the chat, and we're going to be looking at that. At least I am. So Bobby and others don't need to be distracted by it. But I'll read out your question and ask Bobby, and we can also discuss with a few others here. So I know there's Justin's here as well, Rob, Hale, and a few others. So. Anyone want to ask anything specific about ONode or event modeling or event-driven systems? any kind of stuff that we've touched upon? I think we've answered everything.
Yeah, there are no problems with anything we just said.
Let's just continue building things. So I see Justin. Do you have a question? You have your microphone is unmuted. I can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you.
I see your face, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, so your microphone, you might be unmuted, but your microphone might not be plugged in. So I think that's what we're having problems with here. So we'll just wait for that to sort itself out. Meanwhile, who wants to jump the queue while Justin gets sorted?
Right, this is Rick.
Hi, Rick.
I'll ask a question. And I think Bobby touched on this a little bit, and I'd actually maybe ask him. This is a good opportunity to kind of go over it a little more, maybe kind of reiterate the highlight. And it really is around what you recognize as the kind of key hurdles for adoption as you've been experiencing with people. So you talked about, obviously, the key hurdle for adoption for people doing event-based systems in general, right, is this having a clear way communicate their systems in an event-driven way, right? And event modeling, you see, is a way to help that, right? And then, the other thing you highlighted, which is I see generally, is changing over time, dealing with changes over time. And you highlighted two of those, right? The change of the model over time, like, hey, our business was this, and then we realized now it's this. And also versioning events, which is another aspect of dealing with change. How does that impact my implementation?
Yep.
Those were kind of, that's what I got out of everything. Like, maybe kind of, what did I miss on the key hurdles for adoption that you're seeing people have?
Yeah. So you sort of identified the two groups right there. There are always just two kinds of people in this world. People who have dabbled in event-driven thinking and people who haven't, right? At this point, from an O-Note and from a business perspective, I just don't care about the latter yet, right? So I'm not going to be, Adam, I think, is doing a good job, and Greg Young and this group and others, I think, are doing a great job sort of broadening the pool of people who have considered event-centric system design versus database-centric system design. That's not what O-Note is really focused on. O-Note is much more about empowering the first group of users, which is, if you've dabbled in this, if you've bought Confluent, if you're thinking about this in some way and start seeing some of the benefits of this event orientation, boy, O-Note and event modeling can really accelerate you and get you to a good place really quickly. So that's the market that we're focused on, candidly. I don't know really how to help people who are still stuck in sort of database centricity and just thinking about systems from a transaction processing only sort of perspective, and all the other concerns come second: auditability and analyzability and data science and everything downstream of me. Well, they have to ETL out of my database and assume all the data loss and assumptions that I've made on that data, right? Like I don't know how to get them to an event-driven place, and so that's not really my forte. But there's a real on
his plate.
There's a real problem there, and I think we need to address that somehow. And I think right now, at this point, developer skills and mindset are the number one blocker, right? To Adam's point, for most of human history, we've thought of record keeping and information management as this sort of immutable append-only process, right? From financial ledgers to book authoring, right? When I want to write a book, I don't erase an old book and write over the top of it. I just start on new paper and write a new book. But since the 60s, when we've had this extreme resource scarcity around record keeping, developers have systematically and intentionally broken our brains away from a narrative event way of thinking into this database-centric, third normal form, mutability assuming system of thought. And a lot of us are stuck to it, right? Because we're married to it. We've invested a ton of our career and mindset into learning these systems. And so it's painful, almost sometimes physically painful, to adjust our thinking, to break our frame of reference, and to start thinking in this other way, which is more normal and more, native to human thinking in terms of cause and effect and narrative and so forth. Like, that's how our brains typically work. But one of the reasons maybe that software engineers are so weird relative to other people is that we've broken our brains to think about these systems in a very foreign, alien kind of way, which is around mutability and data structures and databases, when really we should be thinking about them in terms of business events. So I don't know how to overcome that sort of like intentional brain damage.
Yeah, I think mean, that's a good answer. It's not quite, I think, maybe I didn't explain my question clearly, because really there's kind of, I'm not talking about hurdles. I actually was talking about hurdles of adoption, right? Which is not hurdles of convincing people that they should adopt, right? Which is like that they want to, but like bringing them on board. It's really like, as you identified, your core customer is the people who have a recognized need, and they've accepted that need, and they've already, like you say, you don't want to be the person in any business, in any startup, and I was like, that convinces the person that they need to solve the problem.
Right.
And then after that, then convince them that you're the best solution to the problem. Right. You want to find people, your ideal thing, you find customers who recognize the problem.
Yep.
Recognize and I like to use the word, they have a burning need, right? A burning need is a need that they've recognized, that there is recognized consequences if they don't take action. Like,
Yep.
this is the pain. If I don't do this over time, I see this pain. I do this, I'm going to hit a roadblock, or I'm going to keep, there's consequences, and they recognize them.
So for those users,
Already
what's
taken
preventing them?
action, right? They're
Yeah.
taking action, and they feel it's insufficient. So they're not like, yeah, I should do that. I know I should do that, but I'm not going to. I know those people, you're not going to sell those people. That's a really painful, even though they know they should, they're not taking action. Then they don't have a burning need. They have a, I should. So now that they've got these people that have this burning need, they've made this shift, right? That barriers to the hurdles to adoption is really the key in saying, now I want to change my world, right? And how I do everything about software development, right? To this thing. Now, so, and I said, yeah, identified Q. Maybe I'll seed one thing. There are types of companies, and there's a lot of people talk about, we're really getting really good in this software factory mindset, right? Which is, I really hate the modern software factory mindset, which is really about delivery. There's no insight here, no business change. We just know exactly what the business wants to do, and we just need you to implement it, like factory workers. Here's some features, right?
Yeah.
But when businesses like yours, you're a startup, there's this whole sense of discovery, right? Mm-hmm. And so now, there's dealing with changes, and then you also talked about the project management aspect of that. You can't just take pieces of your event model and put them into your ticketing system. If here's the work I'm doing next week, right? Or in 2 weeks, right? If a large portion of your work is on this discovery side of things, right? So that, where it's like, hey, we actually have to do some experimentation with the users, and that's real work.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So maybe talk a little bit about how you're addressing those kind of things.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And, there are, well documented, and I think, rigorous approaches to that latter category. So the discovery, our primary job right now, like the Lean Startup, right? Great book, tons of great insights in there. Our primary job right now as a startup is to just discover what our market is, discover what our customers want, and we do that by, as you said, sort of running experiments. And the output of this process isn't necessarily working software. The output of the process is learning, and one of the inputs to the process is working software, right? So that's, I think that's where you're sort of getting at with that question. Whereas other, more established industries, it's sort of this more, subscription or conscription development thing where you hand your developers a rifle and 3 bullets and you send them at the problem, and there's 1,000 developers all doing the same thing, right? That's a different sort of thing from this more discovery oriented process. I would argue that the best way to do any software engineering and any product development is always to have the latter mindset, to have this sort of discovery and perpetual feedback of learning from production, right? That's kind of the 3 ways of DevOps is you deliver software, you get feedback on what that software does, and then you incorporate that learning into this sort of perpetually learning organization, right? That's sort of the goal of a lot of these systems, is to build this learning model. I think by having a system design in ONote, you have a place to put that learning. We do have features in the future where we want to incorporate those operational metrics, the feedback that you're getting from your market and from the users of your software back into the model, so that you can start to really visualize where do we have alignment with what our users are doing and where do we have misalignment, where we can make some good changes. So when I talk to more learning and discovery oriented customers, they get really excited about operational metrics and visualizing those operational metrics, because that's a huge part of what they're doing, and what they're trying to systematize are running exactly those types of experiments, with their users, split testing and all of that stuff. So having a channel for feeding that learning back into the model, I think is really critical for that type of user. And so they get really excited about the operational metrics, the code generation. Everyone gets excited about, because that helps with the delivery part of it. But the feedback part of it, learning-oriented organizations get really excited about. When I'm talking to more established enterprises where accountability and delivering on time and understanding where are we in the delivery process is the higher priority and the higher value, they get more excited about project management. So they get excited about, carving up the diagram and sticking those tasks into Jira, and then being able to visualize where are we in the delivery process. So 2 different customers, like we have features planned for both, but the near term one that we're more excited about is operational metrics and overlaying those, because we really think that helps our learning organization customer overcome a real obstacle that they have now. Does that answer your question better than my first cut?
Yeah, I think that's it. You're seeing the, out of the burning needs is that operational metrics, linking this stuff to operational metrics is another burning need.
Yep. And it's a more compelling need for them than some of the other features that we still have on our roadmap and want to do at some point, but it's just not as compelling to that category of users, right?
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think it's really two categories of users that operational metrics matter to. Even those delivery, like, those DevOps people who are, even though they're taking features in, is the system operating as expected, like, support, whatever. So those people, even though they're not doing any experimentation, they have to support that system. Is it working, right? So operational metrics help those mindset of people, as well as the people who are doing discovery.
Yes.
Operational metrics for them happens very early.
Yep.
In first prototype, even though it's not fully fleshed out, I want to see the operational metrics.
I want to see the metrics, yeah.
So
well, and the best categories of the DevOps people, oh, sorry, there's a delay, so we keep cutting each other off. The best and most talented DevOps organizations, right? DevOps is going the way of Agile, where like the title, the tag itself is starting to lose its meaning because everyone's like, oh, well, yeah, of course we do DevOps, right? Like mostly you don't. Like there are very few organizations that really do DevOps well. And Gene Kim's kind of 3 ways of DevOps. That third way is this sort of perpetual learning where you're actually, one of the techniques is actually intentionally injecting faults into your operational system and then seeing like what happens, So those types of, even though they're delivery focused organizations, they are also perpetually learning, right? Because they're learning about their operations. They're intentionally causing faults in their system and then reacting to what the system does. And that socio-technical system of code and people keeps getting smarter and smarter and smarter in those very best type of DevOps orgs. So I think it would be unfair to categorize that, delivery focused organizations as not learning organizations. I think, John Osbaugh writes a ton of really great stuff about these organizations that from the outside may seem stodgy. And, as developers, like we don't think they're super sexy because they're not using all the cool tech that we like to use. But like at a management level, they're like very sophisticated and learning a ton like all the time because they've built these learning and this experimentation mindset into their practices. So, I don't want to unfairly pigeonhole those folks as not learning organizations because I think there is a category there that too.
I want to interject just one more time because we have another more technically anchored question from Greg on YouTube. So it's about, how do you, in analysis, how do you get developers to focus on larger processes? So, for example, the difference between a credit card changed versus how does a sale work? We talk about swim lanes and we have some opinions on some to-do lists, and I certainly abuse the projection part of event modeling and these types of systems, which I think is a good thing. But for people that are fresh to this, they might kind of how do we not get stuck in the weeds of something like a credit card changed how we process it versus how does a general sales process work, and where on an event model and where in ONote do you go to address both levels of focus?
Yep. Well, and this is something we really want to do. Again, we don't have a near-term feature to address this because I think we need to do some more learning before we attack it. But this is something where by having a data structure in the background and not just a picture, we can start to show different views of this, right? So you drill down on a particular lane in event land and just say, okay, just show me everything that touches this lane, hide everything else so that I can sort of narrow down. Human brains are very visual. Like our visual cortex is extremely well developed. And by changing our visual inputs, it triggers like an automatic context change in our brain, right? So I think that's one of the genius parts of event modeling. And I think by having different views of the system that are for different purposes and different sort of levels of specificity, right? Like, when you're down in the weeds and you're myopic, it's easy to lose the broader context. Look, for some organizations, that's fine. If their developers are down in the weeds and just focused on solving the developer problems, that's fine. For other organizations, you want your developers to like zoom in and zoom out and zoom in and zoom out because it builds sort of the learning on the development team so that they become smarter and better over time. But there will be someone who wants that more process view of the system. Maybe it's a business stakeholder or a manager or someone who's responsible for the P&L of that particular business process, cares deeply about how it works separate from all the other pieces. So yeah, being able to slice and dice how we view that, I think, is one way to solve that. And there's sort of like two directions. Horizontally, like taking a model and being able to hide noise and just being able to isolate what I see horizontally is sort of one way of doing that. And then a way to drill down from less specific down to more specific, I think, is another way of doing that. Again, I don't have any sort of concrete, I certainly haven't solved this problem, but I think by having event modeling as our starting place for these things, I think it's layered enough to where we can start to get to these different views of the system.
Yeah,
views of the blueprint.
I find it's again, it's about it's an organization of information question and how we simplify our views into these things. And so, how I would generally do it is this kind of comes up in the whole Saga process manager kind of patterns talk as well, because a lot of times you'll see these overall, how does sales work get elevated to a process manager or a Saga, if you want to do that. And we specifically at Adaptec anyway, we try not to introduce those concepts and just have more views. If things get too kind of detailed and you start to lose sight of the overall process, there may be a third swim lane for managing two swim lanes that are getting a little bit too chatty and too complex, where that's where you would store the projections of like, okay, now we kind of went past milestone 1 in this process, and now it's past milestone 2, etc. But it is, again, about organization. And how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And it's about having the tooling to allow you to swim through that approach of deconstructing complexity into simple moving parts that can be zeroed in on and understood, but also to zoom back out and see their overall impact and where they end up. And Chris Condren is a very interesting fellow that's helped us out as an advisor for many years now, actually. And he sees the value of event modeling and O-Note as the information completeness, and having that thread through the system. No matter if you've zoomed out or you're in the weeds, you can grab onto one of those threads of where that information is going and where it came through, and you can see to fruition where it'll actually end up, and make sure that that is now a complete system that you can have the courage to go ahead and implement and start going without the walking on eggshells. Sometimes we get in Agile where I know I'm going to have to rework this feature 2 sprints down the line, and by then the solution will be greater and I'll be more afraid, and I'll probably quit to go find another job to start from a nice greenfield project again, right? We don't want that kind of environment. We want that courage that Agile talks about throughout the entire project. We don't want death marches. We want the opposite. We want the nice ending to a project where everything's just easy and free, and we're working on the easiest features, and all the hard problems have already been solved, right? So I think with this small design up front that we get is kind of where we're both after this, and that's why we're helping one another.
Well, and one thing we already have built into O-Note, and this is an area where I want to dramatically expand in O-Note. in O-Note, each event and command and read model and user interface and interface element has a unique identity. And looking at just a single event model diagram, it's probably a transaction processing use case, and it's probably focus on that particular business process or maybe a slice of a business process. But linking together, so if I'm an enterprise and I have 1,000 event models, if there's some way of importing events from event model A into event model B. So now, event model A represents these sort of transaction processing concerns, and that's how we, first interact with these events and where we're originating and writing these events. But event model B is on marketing, maybe it's just a read model and a user interface that displays that read model. And it's just about incorporating events from other event models, building some sort of read model out of it, and showing that read model to key stakeholders or to
right.
decision makers.
The events are the glue, the contracts between.
So these event models are held together by these events and are connected by these events. And because we have a unique identity for each event, we can start to see like, okay, if I'm a developer and I'm focused on my online transaction processing view, and I'm going to change this event, or I'm going to do something around this event, I can double click it or whatever and start to see like, here are all the people who depend on that event, right?
Right.
We've got the security auditing team and the regulatory compliance auditing team who are incorporating their event into their audit views of things. We've got the marketing team who's building a machine learning model based on part of this event. We've got the senior leadership team who has a dashboard that includes a read model that's derived from this event, right? So we can start to see the consequences of our changes in a much broader context, not only broader in a bigger slice of the overall business process, but also these cross-cutting concerns that aren't addressed by any particular business process, but are these truly like Conway's Law things where the auditors don't even super care about your business process. They just care about the outcomes and that we're arriving at those outcomes in compliance with the regulations.
Result driven, right?
That's right. That's right. So, not only broadening our view of the business process, I think that's important, that Greg's highlighting, but also understanding how our actions have repercussions across these cross-cutting concerns. I think that's also a key insight that we can get from event modeling uniquely, right? You can't really do that in data-oriented systems, right? They've tried with these master data management systems to understand, like where a particular field in one system ends up in all these other systems. They're a disaster. It is so hard to use these systems, but understanding it from an event perspective fits into our narrative way of thinking really cleanly, and it becomes this really nice integration point among these cross-cutting concerns.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to have cut you off, Rick. I just wanted to make sure to address Greg's question. Any kind of final thoughts on your point about the adoption phase?
Yeah, I think the hurdles to adoption, I think out of the, as I'm seeing it, right, the things we talked about were, initially was, just that clear model and that shareable model, right, which is what event modeling gives us, and an electronic version of event modeling gives us that a lot better because you can share it better, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the key table stakes hurdle, right?
Yep.
Then we talked about versioning over time, right?
Yep.
As changes over time. That's a little bit and then we talked about operational metrics, mapping this to operational metrics as another one. And what we talked about was, this is kind of one of the key things. It's somewhat related to that, is the mapping, but mapping the implementation level, I'm going to reword what you said, to the higher level business processes, right? And I think that probably is one of the key hurdles, right, that we're facing. Now, you can do that by the same way you map it to operational metrics. You could do that, right? But I have this, here's my higher level generic business process, onboarding customers, doing this, right? And the event model is one implementation of that, right? And if you think about it that way, then I want to say, how does that implementation map to my generic purposeful business process, right? And that's kind of, that was a Greg Young's question, kind of has shades of that. A lot of people have shades of those questions, and that's where I think probably some of the biggest struggle on keeping this alive and keeping it anchored to the purpose, right? And keeping the implementation from taking over and just, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, implementation, solution blindness, right?
Yes.
And I think that's a key that a lot of businesses struggle with. And I think the event-centric way of thinking has great purpose there.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that and facilitating that with our event modeling and our tooling, I think is probably one of the key hurdles in having a business transform and adopt this. Is this the way we do business, right?
Yep. So one of the cardinal rules in software sales is never sell to the technical buyer, right? You don't want to sell to the CTO. You want to sell to the CFO or the chief revenue officer or the CEO, right? Because A, they always have more money. B, they are solving business problems and they use technology as a means to solve a business problem, right? CIO, when you're selling to that person, it's a technical sale. It's about features. It's about, these specific, nitty gritties about what your system does, and not the bigger business problem that it solves. I think a key for us to take event modeling, and for, me and my organization to take notes, beyond sort of the technical sale, is exactly that. We're like, hey, this is solving a real business problem that you have. You may not have even known that you had, but you intuit the pain of that. And like, this is how this solves it. Your CIO signs off on it and it looks good from a technical perspective and their developers are willing to use it. But this is solving a concrete business problem, and so it's not going to be bought by the CIO. It's going to be bought by the chief revenue officer or whoever, right? So that's, we see the need to sort of get to that place in our own sales process, and also to have the features to support that type of a sale. We're not there yet, candidly, right? We see the need to get there, and I think we'll learn a lot along the way. There are already a lot of really great formalisms out there. We talked about some from project management or critical chain or Gantt or whatever. There's what are those diagrams, Adam?
BPMN, the BP business process management.
No. So yeah, certainly that for business process, but the one that's in terms of business need, build versus buy, and where does this fall on our
Wardley mapping?
Right, Wardley mapping, yeah. So Wardley mapping is like more on the strategy side. Yeah. So figuring out a way to sort of unify these already existing and well-adopted formalisms. Some of the formalisms are better than others, and so we'll sort of eschew the ones that
we
aren't
kind
as
of
good.
adopted event modeling to replace Wardley mapping because it adds that timeline, which Wardley mapping sort of just kind of touches on.
Yeah.
So we have our own flavor on attaining the same goals that Wardley maps aim at, and I think the event-driven approach improves it. So certainly credit to thinking about the landscape, thinking of the kind of competitive landscape you're in, and what things are commodities and what things are becoming commodities, and all that in the cost curve. That's all great, but I think decorating that with a timeline and being able to zoom out is something that we do, and I think ONode can be really useful in that as well. So. Well, we had a chat about this, right? Bringing ONode into the executive boardroom, where you can have that really zoomed out view about, we have these capabilities. We can have them in those swim lanes. We can have, keystone UIs to say, this is a completed sale, and look, there we delivered something via a streaming service, which was one of our goals for this year. Yeah. To be able to put those things, but then have that translation to the detail for implementation, and really have that accountability and traceability that event-driven systems have, but echo that all the way through to strategy and C-level discussions, right?
Well, and this goes back to a value that we, as we're building ONode, we try to respect this value of meeting users where they are, right? Like speaking their language, from a code generations perspective, that's about meeting users where they're in intermediate representations or in runtime languages that our users are using. But for these more business concerns, right, projecting the data that we gather in the process of event modeling and the higher strategy data, and finding a way to, maybe you build a projection of a Wardley map from the event model data, or you annotate it with a few other things that you don't quite have from event modeling that are higher level strategy things.
Yes, exactly.
To arrive,
we do SLAs quite a bit that way, right?
Right. And
like this happens within 2 minutes or something.
Right. And then sort of triangulate from one projection and another projection, triangulate on something that is familiar to business users, like a Wardley map or like a BPMN diagram or whatever it is. Meeting users where they are now is a key value that we have. Like, Adam talks a lot about replacing these things, and I think that's a good aspiration.
Well, we want to be the Swiss Army knife, right? So sometimes it's not the best knife because you're a Wardley map expert, so you're going to want a Wardley map. You're a champion knife thrower. I guess you could throw the Swiss Army knife with the knife part extended, but it's not your ideal tool, and that's okay. We need to replace them as given alternative when you don't have the ability to onload a Wardley map expert, a use case expert, a testing expert, and everything else that may have. We want to be the Swiss Army knife that allows you to really get going on a lot of the stuff to get to the 80, 90, or even 100% sometimes, or even better sometimes. If we're going to replace something, we might as well aim higher. It might be different. So the goals might actually change a little bit, but that's okay. It's definitely like, we're going to just replace everything. It's like, that's okay. Aim big. If we aim big, we're going to do a good job on the lower level goals. And I don't think we've really done anything that doesn't allow you to reach the goals that the other tools give you, and we'll continue to push it. That's my job, to be the extremist and push it into the ends, and then you to meet people where they are.
Yeah. And I think the two approaches can and should coexist, right? Where we say, let's meet people where they are, right now, and for users who aren't specialists, right, we can be the 90% solution that covers a lot of these things. But for the users who are specialists, let's facilitate them as well, right? So our UI, like our interface designer is a great example, right? It's sort of like a crappy, just good enough thing for developers to build out UIs.
Yeah, you're not going to replace Figma or whatever.
I'm not going to replace Figma, right? But I can integrate. I can integrate with Figma. I can integrate with Sketch.app or Balsamic, or these really great industry standard tools that lots of designers are using, and that way we can support and attract and retain that category of professional UI UX person, because we're meeting them where they are instead of trying to replace what they're doing. So I think there's a place sort of for both perspectives, where you can support the generalist well by having an inbuilt thing, but then also support the specialist by integrating with the best tools. So
exactly. And sometimes that's the low fidelity UI is all you need. In a startup, you don't want to burn cycles learning Figma yourself. Getting to a level of specification on the mockups that's way too detailed, and you're burning time. You ask yourself, does my current tool ONote have something for the UI? Oh, it does. Is it good enough to specify what I want on those screens? Yes, that's all I want. That answer is yes, and I will put in those text boxes, and I'll put in those labels, and people will understand what's going on, and I'm done. Right? I'm not going to become a Figma expert to get this out the door.
Yep.
So we had another interesting little tidbit from Justin, but there's definitely a two-way relationship between code generation. So if there's a bug fix or something, imagine that the code base actually says, hey, there's a new event, or this event had changed. You could actually bubble that back up and say that, I can see where it's published from in the code base. I can see who's subscribing to it in the code base. I can now have ONote draw that connection for me and highlight it. It's like, hey, the code base you're using actually has a connection here. You're not drawing it. Are you aware that your solution has actually changed? It's incredibly powerful, because a lot of times when there's an outage in production, we don't have time to open up ONote. We just got to fix stop the bleeding. Customers are upset. We're going to have a problem here. So we got to go fix it first. And then to tie things back, we need to make sure that that's reflected in what we go back to the next week to continue to develop. We need to understand that there was a bug and we didn't have a connection. The connection was made in code, but we need to feed that back into the system to show that in fact this event is now being listened to by this other system here.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm sort of two minds about that. Getting back to our similarity with UML sort of discussion.
Yep.
I think UML is so wrong on so many levels, about how it perceived the world, like the philosophies and assumptions.
Grady Booch.
I know. I'm sorry, Grady. But yeah, I think it was wrong just about how it perceived the world and information design. I think event modeling does a much better job of thinking about information systems rather than thinking about software.
Right.
And specific flavors and design preferences in software and so forth. But one of the things that UML was always searching for was that full round trip engineering kind of story, right? And honestly, it never really got there.
That's
there
right.
were
I
a handful
all the case
of
tools. Yeah.
Yeah, the case tools. I mean, you had the whole rational suite where you could do, from code to diagram to code and all that stuff. So part of me, the UML revulsion part of me is sort of no, don't aim for round tripping as a goal. That's an explicit non-goal. Part of me is yeah, that'd be kind of cool. So I'm sort of two minds about the engineering round tripping, from code to diagram.
I definitely had the same reaction, because I also remember those days back around 2000, really wanting to have Visio opened up. And there was a whole bunch of stuff that could use Visio to do the code gen. And I certainly didn't get into the that you could generate from code your Visio as well. I don't think it was really as tightly as they promised, as tightly integrated, so that you can just draw your programs. But I think being able to cut out that tough part, which was the middle, the how, and focus on the state, I think we can do that, because what's easier to track is, did the information make it across to the other system or not? We're not talking about whether this was in a for loop or it was in some sort of tech or an abstraction of a class with this method. I don't care. Is this information on the other side? Yes or no? Yes. If it is, I can, with great confidence, draw that line on the event model in ONote.
Yep.
I'm not going to be wrong by doing that. And
That's right.
There's not many opinions about whether it's there or not. It's there.
It's there.
So that
Yeah.
line has to be drawn.
And it's there whether
Yeah.
some automated process did it, or we're having the intern
That's
write
right.
those things to a DVD
That's right.
ROM and loading it into this other system, right? Completely free of software. So
That's right.
to me,
Good
that
point.
that falls much more into the band of like operational metrics and
Right.
integrating with these data systems like Event Store DB, like Kafka, and introspecting on what's actually happening in the data system rather than the code that's interacting with that data system, and understanding like, hey, yeah, this event is getting written. You know, there's some undocumented Kafka Streams job somewhere that's like taking code from, or taking data from,
but I got,
stream A and putting it in
if I
stream
don't
B,
know how that
right?
line is drawn, I better go figure it out.
Yes, yes,
that's getting over there somehow.
right. And that's, you know, so to me, that's less about, you know, code round tripping and more about systemic round tripping, where it's like we can introspect the system and see what's happening.
I think that's going to be a very interesting area of, you know, in the next months and years.
Yeah.
From the actual use of this to, you know, where we can be a little bit less once bitten, twice shy about what UML left us with in terms of that round trip. I think there's a healthier place where we can do a little more automation and have more insight and remove a lot of the manual inspection. I think it's something I don't want to ignore. I know if you're still a little too hurt about the UML stuff, I'll do it for you. And I know about the OOP stuff too and functional programming. So
UML left us functional programmers out to dry. We had no place.
I try to, you know, Bobby's on his way there, but I try to have the functional approach in non-functional languages, and so that's why I'm a little bit more okay with this than he is. But we'll get there together, Bobby.
So yeah, I would like to, you know, you've kind of danced around a little bit, but there's, you know, the whole round trip engineering, you know, it's like, you know, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And, you know, just because, you know, we could do something, the question is, should we do something and why should we do something? Right. And round trip engineering has had that, you know, jump the shark moment a few times. And the idea is a lot of people want to use it to like, it's like, why do I want round trip engineering? So I don't have to write code. Like obviously, but the problem we're really talking about, is that a problem we have, right?
No, we don't. And I think, are you leading Justin's comments there?
I just want to finish something.
Sure.
What we did highlight here in this discussion back and forth, there is a problem we have, right? Mm-hmm. And this whole thing is, when I draw this event model, I'm laying out my clear intention of the system.
Yep. But and will it get updated?
And now
yes.
there is a real problem was, does the actual match my intention?
Yes.
Right? And that's what we're dancing around is like,
yeah.
I could
we get into documentation
code base and say, does that code base, what's it missing and what extra does it have? How is it aligned? And there is a real problem and a real need.
Yes.
Like, if I make
this is exactly what I wanted to get into, because it is, we've been beating around the bush of documentation falls out of sync with implementation. That's why code comments are bad. Look just at your commit comments. They're more accurate because they're temporal. And Bobby, maybe this is an answer to you why you should embrace the feedback of the code base is to make sure that the event model is fresh. But I think we already addressed that, because the event model is in front of so many more eyes than, let's say, technical documentation and generating code docs for stuff like that. Even, you know, there's been many approaches, even by Greg himself, of moving, you know, the tests to be readable. And look how quickly I can generate a readable version of the test. Well, that's a very small, focused way of doing it. We want more eyes on the whole thing and the complete understanding, and also at the top level and small level. So we want that documentation to be tied a little bit, so that to keep it up to date is not an onerous process.
Yep.
Right. To implement from the documentation is also not an onerous process.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head, is that the UML part was etched into OO stuff, and in the how and a lot of the minutia of the how. And as soon as we let go of that and we have something like event modeling, then we can actually
and what we're talking about what we're talking about is a technical problem to a fundamentally a technical solution to a fundamentally management problem. Correct. Right? It's about organizational behavior much more than it is about technology. So to me, you need to have incentives, management practices, and technology all pulling in the direction of keeping your documentation up to date. So part of the way we address that was what you said, Adam, right? More eyeballs, more people caring about this diagram.
Yeah, caring.
Not just
Imagine.
design,
Yeah.
but throughout implementation and into operations, right? If that model remains useful throughout the software development lifecycle, it's much more likely to be updated because I get concrete, me as an implementing person or me as an operations person, if I'm getting concrete value from this thing, I care desperately when it falls out of date because I develop blind spots in my business processes if it's not up to date. So the incentives pull much more in the direction of me being incentivized to update these documentation artifacts if it remains valuable to me throughout the SDLC. If it's just a thing that I do during design process during a 2-day workshop and then it gets stuck on a shared drive.
Yeah, exactly.
The chances of that thing being accurate at the end of your software development lifecycle is basically zero, right?
Yeah.
But if it continues to provide value to me throughout the SDLC, then my incentives are more aligned to update it. If there are a lot of eyeballs on it throughout that process, that increases the likelihood that it's going to stay up to date. And then if we had some sort of technical introspection at the systemic level to aid and highlight areas where the system is out of date, boy, my management practices, my incentives, and my technology are all pulling me in the direction of keeping this thing up to date. And then we've got a real solution to this organizational behavior problem of having out of date documentation artifacts.
I think Greg jumped in at the right moment here because the answer to Justin's concern about feeding things back is really what Event Store already has built in, which is a lot of the visualization of what's going on with the streams and the state underneath.
Yep.
And so there's a very easy tie-in to ONote from Event Store to show that, hey, we didn't model this event. I don't even need to look at it on the code level. I can just see that there's new events sitting in Event Store. And if I have causation and correlation IDs added to those things, that implies those strings as to what's tied to what. I can very easily feed back to the event model in ONote from Event Store DB to say that, hey, you know what, that event model you have is sadly out of date. Someone needed to change the type of events, whether that actually, that obviously happened in code somewhere because someone fixed a bug or something needed to be done. But look, the flows that we're seeing, the information, the flow of information that we see here is not what's on the event model.
Yes.
Fix it, right?
Yes,
or
fix it. Make it right.
Or automate it. Like as soon as, that standard, the notation standards there, that's easy to actually implement and say, here's the potential version. You don't even have to just have it automatically do it, but you can certainly have a potential version of like, this is what you're using to model your system with. But in reality, this is what's happening. And you can see a diff, a graphical difference, much like Miro kind of hides in purple what someone changed for you. The system could be the user that changed something for you. And all of a sudden you have, a new step in there with a new event. Which implies this command handler, you have to double check whether that's in reality what's happening, but it makes a best guess as to where that came from, puts it in there for you. And all of a sudden you have these little blue or purple or whatever splotches on your event model showing you all the places along the line where the actual system underneath has done it. And you've done it, more importantly, with just, I think what Greg is after, without needing to swim through code.
That's right. And
literally Fred Brooks, out of Fred Brooks' mouth, the state is telling you what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the features that we will have before we can get to code generation and project management integration, some of these other things, is that we'll have a repository, a sort of GitHub-like repository, where the official or the canonical version of this event model is stored. And in that world, if the system detects that something's changed and we've deviated from a particular event model, it can just automatically open up a pull request against that event model. And right then you'd get that diffability, the visual diff, you get all those things.
You could just edit that yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or do the merge yourself.
You can do the merge yourself, or you can say,
just do a non-commit merge and change all the details you want to add in that it might have missed. And
That's right.
Now you have a really good commit message as to why that was there, right?
Exactly.
It's incredible. Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, Bobby, thank you again. I think we're up to 2 hours almost, so we're gonna have to cut you off.
That's fine. No,
I know you do want
edit all the boring parts out, right?
So, but I think it was really good to get into those things, and I really thank everyone that participated. Greg, that was online, and all the people that joined in the Zoom. Unfortunately, Justin had some audio issues, but he had really great points about the feedback loops. Rick always looking after making sure that these things are getting through the right adoption channels and people are seeing things clearly as to why they're doing this stuff. So really awesome audience as usual, and I thank you so much. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we have our February workshop, and Bobby is part of that workshop. Where he will show you ONote. I believe that's the first time I believe we're going to be using ONote throughout the entire workshop. So the February workshop, look on the Adaptec site, adaptecgroup.com. There's a workshop page. Bobby is part of that. We also have Rafael. We have the crew here, the three amigos, going through real implementations in 2 or 3 languages, doing polyglot approaches, really looking at state as your fundamental backbone to your organization from cradle to grave, A to Z, whatever you want to call it. We kind of show how you build systems, deploy them all the way to the cloud and all the modern stuff that you have out there, how it plays into that. So we'll probably have more. Bobby, I'm probably going to pester you for some Kafka stuff maybe to throw in there as well, because I know a lot of people use Kafka for gluing the systems together. So I'm hoping that by the February workshop, we'll have some code to show people how Event Store plus Kafka, the magical formula that Jet.com used for their great success getting acquired by Walmart, for very few years. It would be really a nice way to complete things. So this is going to be an awesome, best yet 2-day short, not the crazy one we did in November. That was 40 hours of hell. This is going to be a shorter one in February. So if you are interested, check out adaptecgroup.com. Bobby's going to be an integral part of that this time around, since event modeling is going to be done in in ONote. And so, of course, go to onote.com, sign up, and look for the new event as well. Anything else I'm missing here, Bobby? So the date was February 3rd is the first one.
February 3rd for our webinar.
Yeah.
Yep. And no, just happy to be a guest on the podcast. So excited. Thank you so much for audience questions, participation. Really appreciate being on the show. Thanks.
Great. And our workshop is on February 18th, I believe, near the end of the month. So there's definitely lots of stuff in the short month of February to look and keep you nice and warm through the cold month if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And so thank you everyone for listening so far, and lots more to come. The next episode is going to be with some Event Store folks, and of course look for the meetup as well. So we divided this up again this year into 2. 1 podcast a week and 1 meetup a week. One's more visual, one's more for the audio. So the podcast is something you can listen to in your car, on your way to work, or in, falling asleep or waking up, whenever you listen to your podcast. I'm glad you joined us, and look out for more episodes. And I'm sure Bobby's going to be back on a subsequent one to update us sometime later on in the next quarter for sure.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to seeing you online on Twitter and the